Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Mesher. I'm back again with another poem that I would like to read and analyze. This poem is by Langston Hughes, who was born in 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. Perhaps maybe you've heard of Joplin before. And he died in 1967. He made his career in New York City, where he moved there as a young adult. Langston Hughes wrote during the Harlem Renaissance, and he was one of the leading writers of the movement, actually. He wrote about African American life from the 1920s to the 1960s, and he aimed to tell a more intimate and a more realistic story of the African American people's culture, including the suffering that they endured and the passions they pursued and excelled at. This poem is titled Harlem. As we see, it's only one word, but it is an allusion to Harlem, New York, which was during the time of predominantly African American neighborhood that really became the center of the Harlem Renaissance. It bolstered a lot of art, a lot of music, and it almost became the golden city of the Harlem Renaissance. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Let's consider the very first line of the poem and the implication that that has. What happens to a dream deferred? Well, in order to analyze that, we'd have to know, what is a dream deferred? Defer means to put something off until later, to halt temporarily. But as we get to the end of the poem, it doesn't seem that the dream was actually deferred. It seemed that the dream had actually died. As we see in the first stanza here, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun or fester like a sore and then run? It really seems that the speaker of the poem is trying to... It's almost like they're turning the idea of a dream deferred over in their head. It gives all these scenarios as examples for what could happen to a dream deferred. And none of them are positive, actually. What really does happen to a dream deferred when the speaker says, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Let's consider the fact that a raisin in the sun would have started out as a grape. It took a while to dry out. It says later, or fester like a sore and then run. When you get an injury, you get a sore, of course. But that sore stays for a while. It's stagnant. It doesn't heal immediately. And then run? Can you imagine letting a sore fester for a while and then running before it is healed? It's not going to be the same experience at all of when you ran without the sore. Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? When you read that line, I think this connects most to the deferred meaning. Something crusts and sugar over, it means that it's slowing down. I think of molasses, how heavy and thick it is, like a syrupy sweet. But a dream being deferred wouldn't be like a syrupy sweet. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Notice how almost every single one of these lines are explicitly sad. These lines aren't meant to be a celebration of the dream deferred. And the only line that I could argue could be different about that is, or does it explode? Does an explosion have to be something negative? When I think about an explosion of, let's say a car. If a car explodes, it would be violent. But what if you have an explosion of energy? What if you have an explosion of passion or a new idea? We often begin new habits. Maybe we start running. Maybe we start exercising because of an explosion of some kind of idea. I think the last line really leaves the idea of the poem up to interpretation. And my favorite part about this poem, and this is one of my favorite poems of all time, my favorite part is each person interprets, or does it explode a little differently? What do you think about that? What do you think the explosion is? Is this a positive explosion? Is this a negative explosion?